to Soul of Travel podcast. I am delighted to be sitting down today with Emily Goldfischer to talk about the hospitality industry, which is a space that we have not really featured on the podcast. So I'm really excited to dive in. I actually, when I was traveling in Switzerland, met with a few hoteliers and a marketing team. So it's conversations I've been starting to have around hospitality, but I'm really looking forward to learning more. So, Emily, welcome to Soul of Travel.
Thanks so much. I am so excited to be here and to chat with you. And I'm a big fan of the soul of travel. And what you're doing with combining travel and women's empowerment. Those are my favorite topics. So super excited to be here. And I really love the community that you've built. So congratulations on that, Christine. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the things that really initially drew me to Hertelier, and for those of you listening, Emily is the founder and editor in chief of Hertelier, which is an online media platform where you're sharing stories of women in the hospitality industry. I think very similarly to inspire other women, enlighten, to create spark conversations around the things that women are facing. And so I think we have a lot of common interests and common passions. So I'm really excited to just dive into that with you.
Great. Me too.
So to get started, I would love for you to introduce yourself a little more than I just did. Let our listeners know who you are and what you look like in the space of travel right now.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I started Hertelier back, it's about a year and a half ago, so in March of 2021. And the idea basically came about, well, I'm a journalist, I should say, and before that, I worked in the hotel business for many years, running the PR for Loews Hotels. And before that, I worked in PR on the agency side, doing travel and tourism as a specialty. Um, yeah, but Hertelier, which is why we're here to chat today, I started in March of 2021. And it was basically the idea had come about because I was noticing that in my role as a journalist, that more and more women were starting to take the top jobs and making some progress in what was traditionally a very much of a male oriented business. Um, so I thought to myself, there isn't a space for women to be inspired, to read about these amazing careers of these women and to kind of get their stories out there and amplify their voices. So I said to myself, it's the pandemic. If there's ever going to be a time for me to start something, this is it. I have the time, and spoke to some friends and colleagues in the industry about it, and everyone was super enthusiastic. So here we are, 300 stories actually later. Amazing to have met and interviewed so many women, and it's just been a crazy, inspiring ride. And people love it. The site's doing really well. We've interviewed everyone from CEOs to presidents to, women in their first jobs working in the hotel business. So, I mean, I would say that's the real difference about Hertelier is that the stories are very much focused on women that actually work in hotels. So not the full scope of travel and tourism, very much focused on lodging.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I love I mean, there's so many parallels because the Soul of Travel really was for me this pandemic project as well. And from noticing that gap in the stories that were being told about women in the industry, wanting to create a space where we could really focus on that and draw attention and create inspiration for other women in the industry. So I think kudos to you. And 300 stories is amazing. And knowing what it feels like to receive those stories, it's also, I think, so personally rewarding. For me it has been to be able to hear the stories and curate them and put them into the space, and kind of the energy that that creates is such a powerful thing that I didn't expect. But I don't know, what has your experience been in curating those stories?
Yeah, I have just been blown away by the connections that you make, that and hearing about everyone's individual journey, and then also just the learning from it, like learning different people, women's experiences, where they were willing to take risks, how that played out. For women just starting their journey, what are the challenges? Where do they look for guidance and mentorship? So it really runs the gamut. And also, there is, of course, the food and beverage element. I mean, there's so many elements of the lodging business. I mean, actually, this week we ran a story about a woman who's the first woman to be a certified turf grass equipment manager. So she basically runs the machines that keep the golf course of a big 5-star resort, Nemacolin, in Western Pennsylvania, looking immaculate. So just like the breadth of jobs, careers, has really been eye-opening, actually.
Yeah, I think it's so amazing when you start pulling it apart because, especially as travelers or consumers of this industry, you kind of just see the people you interact with as you travel. So maybe the person who checks you into the hotel, someone who serves you a meal, and maybe someone who's cleaning your room, or, you have very limited engagement with the industry, but there's so many pieces to make the magic happen that we don't think about. And if you're thinking about getting into the industry, you also only see yourselves in those like 3 or 4 roles you've interacted with, and you don't realize there's so many components, and maybe your zone of genius lies in one of those other components. And so it's so great
Yeah.
to hear those stories to just like be a catalyst for all the possibilities.
Yeah, no, that is a really great point, is that there are so many jobs that you don't even think about. And as a traveler, and what's been really nice about Hertelier is that it has offered this kind of peek behind the curtain, and what are all the different roles and responsibilities that make the magic, as you say, of staying in a hotel.
Yeah. Well, I would love to begin to talk about some of the components. We had a great conversation yesterday that I'm so like grateful for, using that as the outline for this conversation. For those of you listening, we have a huge amount of things as per usual that we could bring into this conversation, but I'd love to start with thinking about why it is so important to bring more women into leadership roles in the hospitality industry. You said you noticed initially more women becoming CEOs and GMs right now than really ever before. Why do you think that's so important, and what shift do you think happened to make this possible?
Yeah, that's a great starting point. And the hotel and restaurants, the careers have historically been male dominated, because partly because it's antisocial hours, that can cut into evenings and weekends, and that can conflict with family demands. And then also, one of the other challenges is that to move up in the hospitality business historically has been, you needed to move from city to city, and that could be difficult. And then also, actually, when I look back at it, hotel schools and the education, that also has traditionally been, male dominated. I actually went to Cornell, and even into the 1970s, the hotel school at Cornell only had a handful of women. Now, actually, the school has more than half women. And I think overall of all hotel schools, I think actually it's more like 70% are women, which is why it's great that we have this pipeline now that can go into these leadership roles. Um, Now, if you look at society in general, I think I mentioned yesterday, one of the books I'm reading right now, which is amazing, is called When Women Lead. It's by Julia Borston, who's a reporter for CNBC. Um, and her book is focused on women in startups, but she does mention the statistic that of all the Fortune 500 companies in the US right now, 8.8% have female CEOs. So the hotel industry mirrors that a bit, in that in the leadership positions, even though 50 to 70%, depending on which statistics you're looking at, 50 to 70% of lodging jobs in general are held by women. When you get to the leadership roles, actually, the very top jobs, it's still around 10%. So there's obviously a broken rung in the ladder somewhere where women, aren't funneling to the top. But I think we are just now starting to see this change over the last, 3 to 5 years. And certainly the pandemic has accelerated that. I think more women now are taking these top jobs. So it's a really interesting time because the industry is building back now after the pandemic. Business is very strong, particularly in the luxury sector, and we're seeing change, and it's really exciting.
Yeah. I think it's really important. I love that you pointed out the statistic of the number of women who are involved in the hospitality industry and the number of women in those executive roles. I think I see that very much in the tourism industry. Um, and then also my noticing from the beginning of my career being at industry events and how many women were there, and then just recently going to industry events and noticing the shift. And that's been over about a 20-year span, but really paying attention to that and being like, okay, I'm not looking for, you know, two or three other women to connect with in the room and find my peers, but that noticing there were so many more, and then trying to pay attention to the roles that they were in, and if they were founders, or were there more women working for tourism boards versus larger tourism companies. Like I kind of had that hat on while I was there and was really trying to notice that change and that shift. And another thing that you and I talked about, which is something I think I really noticed, were more women jumping into entrepreneurship, and really at all stages of their careers, starting companies. And so there were many female founders, but they're of their own small businesses. How
Yeah.
is that? Have you witnessed that, or what have you seen
Yeah,
in terms of
I'll
that
talk
in your
about that.
area?
I want to make one point though, because you brought up something, which is the presence of women at conferences and industry conferences. And again, this has historically been a real issue where there aren't many women. The women that attend maybe don't feel comfortable because they're very much in a minority. And this is something I give a lot of credit to a woman called Peggy Berg, who started this organization called the Castell Project. I think it's maybe in its fifth or sixth year. And her whole mission is to, again, build that pipeline of women, giving them the leadership skills. So she has programs called Build and Elevate, and for different parts of your career, they offer training. And then she really was on a mission to get more women on the podium at conferences, at industry conferences. So um, the Castell Project just merged this year with AHLA, and they are just doing a lot of work to try and elevate women and the visibility of women in the industry, and particularly at conferences, and to offer this kind of training to help more women get ahead. So, again, one of the reasons why Hertelier exists is to report on this and to share these stories, and also for women in the industry to learn, that this kind of thing is available.
Mhm.
But you had asked me about entrepreneurship. Um, yes, I am seeing more women go into entrepreneurship, but I would say overall, as I've looked back on the 300 stories that we've written, I've noticed, maybe five different trends or areas, themes that these kinds of stories have fallen into. One of which is entrepreneurship, and that in particular, using technology to solve problems that they've noticed in the hospitality and the lodging space. So, one woman who we profiled is called El Rustique, and she started this tipping platform. Her mother was a hotel housekeeper. Her personal background was in education, actually. She was working at Stanford and she was traveling a lot for work, and noticed that less and less people were carrying cash. And as a frequent traveler, she was like, that means people are going to be tipping less. And she went out and figured a way with the QR code technology to enable people to tip using their phone. And I think her business is maybe 2 years old. She's doing great. You know, she's partnered with a couple of different hotel chains. Um, and, you know, it's just, that's one example. Um, yeah, of entrepreneurship. I mean, I've seen also in the food and beverage space, a woman called Marvina Robinson, who we profiled, who started the first champagne brand out of Brooklyn, New York, but it's French champagne. She cleverly has branded it B. Stuyvesant champagne. She's from Bed-Stuy, and she's, you know, got her product in hotels now. So it is really a fun, you know, range that you see, and so impressed with how clever women are and how they are willing to be so entrepreneurial, as you noted.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to. I had on my list talking about women using technology in the hospitality industry, and so you already mentioned that with Tip Right, which when you told me about that, I thought that is such a brilliant awareness to have, and then to be able to use technology to solve that. I wouldn't have thought about that. I have noticed when I've traveled that I don't often have cash when I'm in the room. And then I'm thinking, well, are people still tipping the way they used to? How does that work? And like, I again, like I had the awareness, but I actually didn't go past that. And when you mentioned that, I thought, oh my gosh, that's such a brilliant idea for someone to you know, see that gap and step in and find a way
Yeah.
to create that
Yeah,
change.
she would be a great guest on your show, actually, because her mom was a hotel housekeeper, and she talks about how when she was a child, and her mom got a tip, or, you know, had a good day of tips, that, you know, she would treat her brother and her to a happy meal at McDonald's. And like, this is a really vivid childhood memory of hers. And yeah, and like Tip Brightly, her company is, you know, doing really well. And yeah, I'm really rooting for her. I really hope she gets into a lot of hotels with this technology, because I think she has other visions, bigger visions for people who they consider people who don't maybe have a bank account, the underbanked. And she has a lot of ideas on how to create access for hourly workers and people like that to have the kind of banking abilities that you and I take for granted.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Another person I know that we both know, Jessica Blotter, she started Kind Traveler, the Kind Hotels. I would love to hear, I know that's someone that you have focused on with Hertelier, um, you know, how that technology is changing things in the space of the hospitality industry.
Yeah, I mean, her whole mission of, you know, doing well and doing good, it just really resonates. And yes, she basically created an online travel agency, so a competitor to your booking.com or you know, Expedia, that basically has the charity component built in. I mean, the brilliance is in the simplicity of it. And she's got a ton of partners. I mean, I know she was on your show, so she probably spoke more eloquently than I am about the mission of her business, and how, you know, that's just done so well. And she's growing, and just, you know, also I think the great thing about Kind Traveler is just how the storytelling of each destination is really built into her site, and she raises awareness for so many different causes that people might not have known about. So to me, that, I mean, you had a long chat with her, so is that something that resonated with you?
Yeah, no, and what I just was thinking though, between both of these two examples of women in this space, is this mission driven and this like deep personal connection and experience that becomes this thing that serves communities, which I think um I mean, I spend a lot of time obviously talking with women and about their missions and visions and passions. So it seems to me they often have this deep personal investment in the thing that they are creating. I think, I don't know if that's unique to women or not, but I feel like it becomes, like you said, the storytelling is such a huge part of Kind Traveler, and it only
Yeah.
really exists because it's coming from this space, that this emotion and this experience that Jessica had. If she hadn't had that, Kind Traveler could maybe exist, but it wouldn't exist in the same way. Have you seen that with some of the other women that are either, using the technology aspect or just in general of how they show up in the hospitality space?
Yeah, Jessica definitely strikes me as one of those. Certainly in the sustainability area, a lot of women are very passionate. They've started consultants and consultancies, and they're really trying to help the industry and the world, because to allow for travel to be responsible and meaningful, and also not something that's going to ruin our planet. So, yeah, I mean, I think when I think of sustainability, I think of a woman we interviewed called Sue Williams, who is the general manager of Watley Manor, which is a 5-star resort in the Cotswolds. And she's really proven that you can have sustainable luxury. And she's just been on a mission to measure everything. And her whole thing is that, what gets measured gets done. And the other thing that's great about Sue, and I think you could say this of women in general, is that she has shared everything that she's learned. So she was recognized as having the most sustainable hotel in the UK. Um, but everything that she has learned and everything that she's done at that hotel, she has openly shared with the industry, and she is trying to help other hotels be as sustainable as she is at Wally Manor. So I think that's a great example too about how women are conscious of helping others and helping elevate everyone in the industry, and this idea that there is abundance. It's not the idea of having it as a sort of a competitive advantage. It's something to share.
Yeah. I think that's one of the, I mean, the most impactful things for me to have witnessed that amongst the people I've talked to as well. I feel like that is a true statement that I've witnessed, that if we've solved a problem, taken down a barrier, we don't want to like put it in place for the person behind us, that we're like, no, we've taken care of that. Here's how you navigate this. Here's how you can bring this into your business. Because again, like if your goal is to create this impact or create equality or to have, a environmental impact, you don't just want it for you and your business, you want it on a larger scale. So it doesn't make sense not to share that knowledge. And I think that's a very different paradigm in the workspace. And I think that a lot of people have grappled with that because or not technically, traditionally, we're kind of territorial about knowledge, and we are kind of territorial about success. And I feel like that has really been shifting in the recent years as well, that it isn't this all or nothing, all for one mentality that we're seeing.
Yeah, I feel like in general that is another one of the observations that I've made about women in the industry, is that um they do want to lift each other up. In fact, just this year, a few months ago, there and Hertelier, as part of this, is that we've a woman by the name of Rachel Humphrey has kind of coordinated the Castell Project and all these different organizations. In fact, there's 23, I think now, different women's organizations within the lodging and hospitality sector, and created this Women in Hospitality Leadership Alliance. And it's, literally just keeping in touch once a month or once a quarter, by email, and then once a quarter trying to meet on a Zoom and just share ideas and brainstorm about how to just keep everything moving forward and create more gender equality. I mean, because that's really the big goal.
Yeah, I have also seen, I mean, I have in the past 2 years become a part of countless communities of women, both in tourism and the entrepreneurial and business space. And it's great to be able to, you know, brainstorm all these ideas. And like you said, the end goal is really keeping progress going and keeping people moving forward. And once you like set that as a collective, it's so much easier to just move that direction. And I think it's been great to be a part of that wave over the past few years.
Yeah.
I would really love to talk about one thing that has come up for me recently. I just actually had been interviewed about on the question of how do we attract and keep women in this industry. And you kind of alluded to this earlier, talking about hospitality industry not really being paired well with women's responsibilities. And I think when we start to have this conversation, we realize pretty quickly there's larger cultural and systemic issues that we are battling. But if we're going to break it down and think about how we can attract more women into leadership roles and into this industry in general, what do you think that takes?
Yeah,
What do we have
sure.
to navigate?
Y- yeah, yeah. That's a topic of a story that's actually going to come out today. But basically, um, flexibility is the key thing, and we're seeing this again across many industries. But since the pandemic, when people were forced to work from home, and the fact that technology has enabled people to do their jobs from anywhere, um, it's been an incredible thing to see that shift. And I think where you wouldn't have necessarily seen, certain jobs, that the industry in general was resistant to any kind of flexibility. Now, they're open to it. And that's partly due to the fact that there's a labor shortage and there's a lot of pressure on hotels to just get people to have people to work various jobs. But whatever the reasons, the result is that there is more flexibility available to any hotel workers, and this makes it more attractive to women. So, for example, we wrote a story about a really inspiring woman called Lisa Williams, who's the executive housekeeper of the Grand, which is a 5-star hotel in York, which is in kind of northern England. And there are 2 universities in York, and she realized that through technology, she could use this app that's called Indeed Flex, which is kind of like if you were, it's sort of like an Uber, but for people, for employees. And so she's been able to utilize this technology to offer shifts, and actually shifts at any time. So whatever time you want to work, if they need people, you can work. And to give people this kind of flexibility. So what she realizes, that there were women who wanted to drop their kids off at school and be able to pick them up, and maybe they just wanted to work a 4-hour shift. She said it has, initially it doubled her administrative work, but that it's just worked amazingly well. Because the other thing is that what she realized is that hotel guests, and I guess everyone's known this for ages, but never really thought about a way to accommodate for it, is that hotel guests arrive all throughout the day. And so now she has housekeepers that are also arriving all throughout the day. So actually people are much more efficient because she'll have fresh, workers that are, housekeeping is very physically demanding. And, now she's got fresh housekeepers all day long. and it's worked great. So yeah, I think that in general, also in roles like sales and accounting and things where you're not guest facing, there's definitely way more flexibility now than pre-pandemic. And it'll probably continue at that pace. Now, of course, in hotels, there's a lot of guest facing jobs, and there's not much flexibility in that. Um, but we'll see. It could just be that there's more availability of shorter shifts, and that I think would have a huge impact.
Yeah. The hotel properties that I was touring in Switzerland, I mentioned this, but we were talking a lot about it because primarily their staff are women and the customers they serve are as well. So they have a lot of conversations about how to meet the needs of women in both aspects of that exchange, and flexibility was one of the huge things. And they said that they initially there was a lot of resistance of kind of easing into flexibility, but once they found they were turning away great employees because they couldn't fit the box that they needed them to fit into. So if they needed someone to work at that hotel front desk from 9 to 5, and then someone to work from 4 to 10 Monday through Friday or Thursday through Sunday, whatever it was, like they had a rigid schedule that they were trying to fill, and they would find they would have great employees that would come in and interview, but they really couldn't work Fridays, or they
Mhm.
really needed to be mornings because they were going to school, or all these different things that were impacting them being able to hire the employee they wanted. And they realized once they created flexibility, they had better employees. So they had people that were working, 3/4 time so that they could always have their evenings and weekends off with their children, or go to graduate school, or whatever the other thing that they might need as a human to exist versus just as an employee to exist. Then also the people, once they were hired into those positions with the acknowledgement of that need for flexibility, they showed up in a different way. So they were more
Yeah.
loyal and committed to their job and committed to the customers. And they had better energy overall with how they were interacting and engaging. And I hope that perhaps this will be something that we'll see as a shift, because as you said, guests are showing up at all hours, and it doesn't mean that we need to have really rigid times that we are showing up to serve them, that we really could be
Yeah.
flexible.
Yeah, it's definitely a trend that I think is here to stay. There is a hotel here in London. Haven't written about it yet, but they've gone to a 4-day work week. It's called the Landmark. Yeah, so and in fact, there's in the UK, they're doing this massive study across many industries of how the 4-day work week is going. And it's like you said, people bring a different energy to the workplace because they're just, I think, more focused, and then also more focused on the fact that they'll have 3 days off. And I think I saw a study or an article saying that actually what people do with that extra day off is people are sleeping more, which is another story that we're working on that I haven't published yet. But just this idea of the importance of sleep and self-care, that's another thing that hotel companies have talked to me about in terms of perks that matter to their employees, is like, how can the company help people live better, more healthy, fuller lives? And self-care is part of that.
Yeah, that reminded me of I prior to, or not prior to, part of my experience in my career has been working in event planning. And so I would witness the hotel staff that's welcoming me and my event, right? And they're on their game and they're ready to host me, and we're juggling all these things to make my event happen. And at the end of the 4 days, I collapse because we just did this huge thing. And I'm so grateful it's done for another year. And then I look at the next day, like as I'm leaving, this team welcoming in their next event, and they're doing it all over again. And you just think, how on earth can you sustain
Yeah.
the level of energy and finesse and doing, I mean, it's incredibly intense mental work and physical work because you're on your
Yeah.
feet often from 6 a.m. till 11 p.m. if you have evening parties. And yeah, again, I think just looking at, like you said, how do we create more well-being for our employees that allow them to do the job that we wish for them to do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is a career if you're on property that requires a lot of, energy and enthusiasm and but people thrive on that. One of the questions that we often ask in our interviews is, do you think hospitality is a gene, or is it like that you're born with it, or that it's something that can be trained and taught? And it's interesting to see the answers. I'd say like 75% of the people say actually hospitality is something that you're born with. But there are people who feel that it can be trained. And I think it's this idea, the overriding idea is that if you have a person that's very empathetic, that can, put themselves in someone else's shoes, that they end up being very good at working in hospitality.
Yeah, I think that this kind of comes back to a lot of times we talk about how many women are in the tourism industry and the hospitality industry because of their nurturing, instinctively nurturing
Yeah.
nature, or gathering of community, or creating safe spaces, like all these things that we may do instinctively really lend themselves to this industry. And so maybe some of that can't be taught. However, I think you can always learn to execute a list of actions that create an outcome. So yeah, there's such an interesting dynamic on the people that maybe are drawn to this and why they're drawn to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, and I think also it speaks to, especially over the past few years, the way that people stand with it or stick with it, because if it is so much a part of who you are, you really feel you can't walk away from it. And I think that has also been really interesting because you've had to sacrifice a lot to stay in both the tourism and hospitality industries in the last 2 years. And that does have to be, I think, a part of your being. I think we've maybe seen the people who were doing it as a profession
Hmm.
look to other avenues, but people who are doing it as an extension of self are still here trying to figure out how we can keep doing it.
Yeah. I mean, certainly the industry lost people to in the pandemic to other industries. And I've heard anecdotally that they're starting to see people coming back because they miss the energy of working in the hotel business. And, like you said, all these interactions that you have, and the fact that you can be, your shift could just go by really quickly, because it's just super busy, and next thing you know, it's over. So, and the camaraderie, I think working in a hotel, there's a lot of community and camaraderie that people really thrive off of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I spent a summer working outside of, well, both out of Yellowstone Park and Glacier Park, different summers. But the
Cool.
one I worked at a small inn outside of Glacier. And yeah, that camaraderie that you were speaking of, like there's definitely something about getting through a big season or a big push. And in that instance in particular, we lived in the middle of nowhere. So the town where the inn was had maybe 20 full-time residents. So like you were there to be there and there was no escaping it. And the like closest town for groceries was 45 minutes to an hour away. And yeah, there's a bond that those of us that survived that summer that we all carry with us. But there was such a great energy of doing it together, and I do think that could be something that is very addicting. But also, you like you said, it's you really do thrive in that energy, and I think that's kind of unique to that space.
Yeah. Yeah, and as women, and people in general move up the ranks, of course the challenges are different, and it becomes more about managing big businesses. And I do think that that's also what is really attractive about hospitality is that you can, start at one job and then you keep moving up and you get challenged throughout your career, but then you end up running these big multi-million dollar businesses um that have all kinds of different, facilities and operations that you have to oversee. And it turns out, women are doing really well with that. One of the stories we wrote about was a woman who actually is a friend of mine as well. We went to college together, but her name's Abby Murtaugh, and she is the GM of the Arizona Biltmore. And she took that property over after it was coming off of a $100 million renovation. So it's like these are really big businesses with, she manages several hundred employees. Um, and they have, giant pools and, I think about 5 or 6 restaurants and a lot of meeting space. And they do big conventions and parties and events and that kind of thing. So, it's really, you end up running very big, complex businesses. And, it's, women are just really good at this kind of multitasking, really looking at the data and making decisions based on that, and guiding, the hospitality nature of it with, this idea, this underline of caring. So, yeah, it's just been really interesting.
Yeah. Well, throughout the season, I've been asking my guests what the change is that you want to be a part of creating in the industry and even really in the world. For you, what is that driving force? What is that change that you want to be a part of?
Really, this idea that representation matters and this is how people get inspired. So the whole purpose of Hertelier is to amplify these stories. And just as who, let's say, Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk is, like, the women that are starting to lead these hotel companies, I would like to know their names and have young women be inspired by Stephanie Lenartz, who's the president of Marriott, and or Hilda Perez Alvarado, who's the head of, all the hotel real estate at JLL. So just this idea of creating these really, personalities around these women so that they're well known. And then just sharing the stories that will impact women at all stages of their career to inspire them. So that's a change I want to be a part of, and I think Hertelier is definitely on the way to doing that. We've built a strong community on LinkedIn, and if your listeners are at all interested in this kind of peek behind the scenes of the hotel business, they should follow us on LinkedIn. We're almost at 4,000 followers, which is quite a lot, considering we only started a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm really proud of. And yeah, actually, also we have a weekly newsletter which women can, or anyone can, subscribe to. That's actually the other surprising thing about Hertelier, and I think this is a topic we haven't touched on yet, but this idea of allyship, and that men are super into helping women rise up the ranks as well, and very interested in the content that we're putting out. And actually, I mean, at one point I checked and like 40% of our readers were men. So yeah, so I think it's just this idea of amplifying the stories, the voices of women in the industry.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for mentioning that because I think that that's something that I have found really interesting too is when I check my stats and things is seeing how many men are listening to Soul of Travel podcast and the conversations I've had, and that sharing these stories is not just sharing them for women, that men are listening and questioning how they can be a part of this rise as well. And so I think it's really important. And when we are often focusing so much on women, people think that that means that we're in some way trying to exclude men from the conversation. But I think that that is not the case, that
Yeah,
we
definitely
just
not.
really
And
see that
yeah,
freedom.
just a lot of allyship, and we're covering more of that and interviewing men about, allyship and what that means to them, and why they're so excited to inspire women, whether they're fathers or brothers or, it's that's the world we live in, and I think men are definitely on board.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate so much your time today, Emily. This has been such a great conversation. I think that there's so many different ways that people can now start to look at their own travel experiences, how people can think creatively about how to be a part of this industry, and also just how to see, one another's stories and ask how we can support one another. So I hope that people are inspired. Before we end the conversation, if there are any last notes about how people can be involved in supporting the storytelling and the work that you're doing at Hertelier, I'd love to give you the space to do that. And then we have a few rapid fire questions to end the conversation.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely follow us on LinkedIn. Just look for Hertelier, which is Hertelier. Online, we're www.hertelier.com. And we're also on Instagram. And then I started mentioning it, and then I think I actually cut myself off, but I do a weekly newsletter on a Sunday that basically rounds up hospitality news from the week with a feminist slant. And yeah, so just in that space covering, different news stories that affect women in business. And then, of course, what we've written about in Hertelier. So it's a great way to just kind of keep up with what we're publishing on the site, but also a handy way to just keep up with industry news as well. So I hope people will subscribe, and it's totally free. And we have a very high open rate. So I'm proud of that because that means people like it.
Yeah, well, I have really appreciated it. I feel like every time I open something up and read it, I feel like I walk away with something new, or just, another thread of conversation for me to explore. So I love that LinkedIn, you mentioned that that's what brought us together. So the magic of connection there, I
Yeah.
really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great.
well, we already kind of talked about this, but the first rapid fire question is, what are you reading right now?
Oh, yeah, I'm happy to talk about this because I am loving this book. It's called When Women Lead. It's by Julia Borston. And it's just, she has interviewed, I think, over 100 women that are specifically in the startup space. And she talks about how less than 2% of all VC venture capital funding goes to women. So she's focused in on these women who are in this 2% because they're obviously outstanding, and what it's, what have they done that they've been successful in this space that's so rare for women to be successful. And there are just so many lessons in that book already, and I'm only halfway through it. So definitely check that out.
Yeah, I'll leave that in the show notes. I've heard her on a few podcasts promoting the book recently, and it's very good. I need to take the time to read the whole thing, but it's been great just to hear her talking about the book as she's been promoting it. What is always in your suitcase or backpack when you travel?
Interesting question. What is always in my suitcase or backpack when I travel? Well, I'll give you my travel tip, and this is how I take my passports. I always put them in a Ziploc bag and put that in my bag or my backpack because then it's easy to find. And then you're just like not spending your time in the airport where you're constantly taking the thing out and putting it back in. So that's my tip, is that put all your passports, if you're traveling with your family or on your own, whatever, and something see-through and easy to grab.
Yeah. Let's see. To sojourn is to travel somewhere as if you live there. Where is a place that you would like to sojourn?
Oh, where is a place I would like to sojourn? There are so many places that I still want to see in the world. I mean, we moved to London 12 years ago from New York. And since then, we've been blessed to be able to travel all around Europe and even parts of Asia because that's easier to get to from here. I would say there's no place that I don't want to go right now. Well, there's a few places I don't want to go right now, but not because I'm not interested in that country. It's just because there's unrest in the world. But I mean, at the moment, I'm interested in going skiing over Christmas. So that's what I'm looking at. I can't say I have some lofty particular place, but we try to travel regularly. I just last 2 weeks, I was in France and in Belgium. And in Belgium was a country I actually, despite it being so close to London, hadn't been to before. And I went with my son and we did an e-bike trip through Flanders, which is the part of Belgium where they speak Dutch. And it is beautiful. E-bikes are amazing, and I highly recommend that.
Yeah. I just got to experience an e-bike for the first time when I was in Switzerland, and I would love to do it in a place where I wasn't constantly going either up or down. I would love it in a
Then
place that was
Belgium
flat.
is the place because it is literally flat. The only time you have to go on a hill is if you're on an overpass of a highway or something. But the other fun fact is that they have 7,500 miles, so 7,500 miles of bike trails, and they keep them incredibly well maintained. I mean, Belgium is one of these countries that's like, it must be one of the best, voted always one of the best places to live in the world because it's just like the culture, the food, it's just really beautiful. There's so much countryside right near the city, so there's always the opportunity to enjoy nature, which I thought it just really impressed me. Plus, there's tons of history, like in Bruges and in Ghent was a beautiful city. I just really, I was blown away by Belgium. It's amazing.
Thank you. What is something that you eat that immediately connects you to a place you've been?
Chocolate in Belgium. It was so good.
All hands on to
Um,
Belgium.
yeah, yeah. I just like yeah, I guess because I just came back from there. Yeah, I just was really impressed with the food, the beer. I mean, I'm not much for beer, but one night we actually stayed in a brewery, in a place called Mechelen, which is a small city in Belgium, and they brew this beer. It's like a kind of a bright, like a light yellow, like a sun colored yellow. And I don't know, they serve it really cold. It's so refreshing. Yeah, I would say I don't even remember what you asked me when I started just talking about the beer
That's
and
okay. Food that you ate, but that's okay.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, the food was just great. I think actually they have more it's become a whole show about Belgium, but basically they have more Michelin star restaurants per capita in Belgium than any other country. I learned as well when I was there.
Wow,
So I
that's
guess
amazing.
that's the beauty of travel, isn't it? Like you go to a place and you can learn all this stuff about how they live and what their life is like. And I just find that so inspiring.
Yeah, to become so deeply connected to a place that you maybe hadn't really even, not that you didn't know it existed, but it wasn't a place that held any importance to you, and then you have that connection and it becomes a part of your story, which is, yeah, I think what is
Yeah.
really magical.
Chocolate and beer, definitely Belgium. Yeah.
If you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or past, who would it be?
Oh dear. Um, yeah, I heard you ask these questions to other people and I didn't prepare them for myself. Um, who am I? You know what? I'm going to go with Eleanor Roosevelt. I was just reading about her and she just really inspired me as this kind of interesting trailblazing woman in a time where women, she had there was no one showing her the way. So I think I'm going to go with Eleanor Roosevelt.
Thank you. And the last one, obviously, we both love to bring attention to women doing amazing things in the industry. Who is one woman you admire and would like to recognize in this space?
I'm going to say my partner, Nancy Mendelson, who helps me with Hertelier. Um, she's she actually came up with the name for the site. So she's been with me working on the site since before it launched. And we worked together at Lowe's many years ago. She was my boss there. So she continues to inspire me. She contributes to the site with a weekly column, a weekly advice column called Unpack It with Nancy, which is one of the most popular columns on the site. She's got great advice. She's worked in the travel space. She worked in media and publishing. Um, she produced TV shows. She's just an incredible woman who I think a lot of people really resonate with the advice that she shares every week from her career and her life. So,
Yeah.
Nancy.
Thank you. Thank you for honoring her in this space. Thank you so much for joining me. It's always nice to connect with a kindred spirit who has a similar mission to amplify the voices of women. I really hope people learned a lot and that they check out Hertelier and learn about the women that you are telling their stories as well.
Thank you, Christine. I really enjoyed chatting with you. I love your podcast and the community that you've built. And I look forward to hearing more of your episodes. And I'm so excited for you that you've done 100 and that each season seems to get more interesting and more exciting. So congrats to you and thank you for having me.
Thank you.